It's mean. It's ugly. And it's the aircraft ground troops call on first when they're caught in a jam.
They were taking fire and needed immediate support.
Its weapon of choice, the most powerful Gatling-type cannon in the Air Force inventory.
It's capable of firing 70 rounds per second.
They are threatened just by the sound of the airplane.
The A-10 Thunderbolt is the aircraft that changed the definition of close air support.
Every aspect of how we put the A-10 together was like a radical innovation.
It's caused more controversy than any other Air Force fighter.
The A-10 seemed to violate every precept of streamlined, high-speed design.
And some of its toughest battles were against the very people who brought it to life.
The Air Force had no intention of deploying the airplane.
In 2012, Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan. NATO has been waging war against the Taliban for 11 long and deadly years. Over 60,000 U.S. soldiers have boots on the ground. The A-10 Thunderbolt is there too.
The A-10s have been an integral part of the operation since the beginning.
Lieutenant Colonel Paul Zerkowski was commander of an A-10 squadron in Operation Enduring Freedom.
We provided pretty much 24-hour coverage with the A-10, where we had airplanes airborne just about all hours of the day and night.
In May, President Barack Obama announces that Operation Enduring Freedom will soon come to an end.
We're now unified behind a plan to responsibly wind down the war in Afghanistan.
Coalition forces count down to a time when they can leave the war far behind. But the Taliban has other plans. They don't intend to let the Americans get out alive. June 2012. At Bagram Airfield, Zerkowski and his wingman prepare their A-10s for flight. But moments after takeoff, the routine mission turns into something more.
We were re-rolled to what is called a troops in contact. That meant somebody on the ground was taking fire, and they were requesting support.
That somebody is a 90-member special operations team. They're returning from a mission deep in Taliban territory.
They were working up a spine or a ridge line between two rivers to a helicopter landing zone where they had planned to be picked up. They were complete with their mission. They just needed to get up the spine and get on a helicopter to go home.
2 miles below the pickup point, the team is ambushed by Taliban fighters. Now, the safe haven of the landing zone might as well be a million miles away.
At that point, there's so much gunfire on the ground, they can't even bring the helicopters in yet.
The soldiers on the ground are completely surrounded. To get out alive, they have just one hope: the A-10.
There were 90 guys on the ground that were threatened by enemy fire, and it was an imperative that we get in there and help them. At that point, we just pushed it up and got there as quick as we could.
When Marines and Army troops are overwhelmed by the enemy, they want just one aircraft, the A-10.
What we got here is the A-10 Thunderbolt II, more commonly known as the Warthog, or just the Hog by those who fly it.
The Warthog. It's the ultimate gold standard for close air support.
Close air support is protecting troops on the ground. We work closely with those troops to make sure that they're able to effectively operate safely on a complex battlefield. And we got some great firepower to help them do it.
Great firepower is the A-10's specialty. The Warthog is basically a gun with an airplane attached.
The A-10 gun is called the GAU-8 Avenger, or just the gun by A-10 pilots. It's 21 feet long. It's the heaviest gun, automatic cannon mounted on aircraft. It weighs more than 4,000 pounds when it's fully loaded.
The Avenger's magazine holds over 1,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition, spit out at 70 rounds per second.
It's effective enough to kill armored vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, all the way down to small, soft point targets. We can use it against moving targets, we can use it against static targets, we can use it against buildings. Pretty much everything that a really powerful gun can be used for, we use it against.
The gun isn't just powerful, it's precise. 4,000 feet above the ground, the Warthog can strike within 40 feet of its target.
You can be assured that anything within that 40 feet is not going to have a good day. The outer pylons are reserved for lighter ordnance, specifically air-to-air missiles. As you move inboard, we mount sensors, flares, and some rockets out on the outer pylons. As we move in towards the center of the plane, we can carry heavier ordnance, so air-to-surface precision-guided missiles. And the bombs are most commonly loaded on the inboard station. This right here is known as a triple ejector rack. So the TUR can carry 3 bombs, 500-pound each. It can also put rocket pods with 7 rockets each on these stations. So you can picture the variety and number of ordnance that the A-10 can carry into the battlefield environment.
It's not going to win any beauty contests, but for generations of soldiers, the A-10 and its pilots have been a lifesaver.
If I do my job correctly, more American men and women are coming home safely at the end of the day.
In Afghanistan, Zurkowski and his wingman fly fast through the mountains. It takes just minutes to get to the firefight.
When we first arrived, we had other assets on station that were supporting the mission. There was a AC-130, an MC-12, and then there was a B-1 that was above him.
The A-10 soon discovered that trouble isn't just on the ground. It's in the air, too.
There was a pretty good cell or rainstorm that was developing. The enemies tactically used this to their advantage, so they had waited for the weather to roll into the valley before they started to shoot.
As the weather rolls in, coalition planes are forced to fly lower and lower, or risk crashing into a cloud-covered mountain. For the A-10s, flying low is no problem.
We have the capability to work in poor weather. We have the capability to work at low altitude and provide fire support to the guys on the ground when they need it.
But the other planes are designed to fly high and fast. Navigating the rain clouds is too much of a risk.
At that point, there wasn't enough room underneath the weather where they could operate safely. They, one by one, started to check out because they couldn't provide any support.
By now, the A-10 pilots can barely see the ground.
Operating in that rainstorm was very challenging. When it starts raining, you can't see as far in front of you, and your sensors can't see through the weather either.
In order to locate the ground troops, A-10 pilots have to rely on their ground-to-air radios. For most fighters, this could be a challenge, but not for the A-10s. The Warthog is optimized to communicate directly with troops on the ground.
Close air support missions start with detailed integration between aircraft and ground troops. In order for us to do that, we need to be able to talk to them. So my tools are 3 radios that I have by my left hip here that allow me to talk to and coordinate with pretty much everyone.
A Warthog pilot can tap into 3 different radio networks. The first allows them to speak with troops on the ground. The second network is dedicated to talking to the other aircraft. The A-10's third radio network connects it with a JTAC, or Joint Terminal Air Controller. That's an officer on the ground who oversees the entire offensive operation.
The radios are crucial to the execution of close air support so that we can understand, we can integrate, and we can adjust to dynamic battlefield environments.
Over Afghanistan, Zurkowski and his wingman radio down to the troops. The news that comes back isn't good.
The troops on the ground said they were taking fire, and they were taking fire from the north and from the west.
Zurkowski and his wingman are reluctant to use their cannon. If they can't find the troops, they risk shooting their own soldiers.
It's very difficult to see the actual personnel in the kind of rocky terrain, and they're all wearing camouflage and they blend in pretty well.
By now, the news from the ground is urgent. The Taliban is closing in fast.
It was critical we provide support, or it was likely that they would be overrun, and there were 90 lives at stake on the ground there.
If the A-10s don't shut the enemy down soon, it'll be too late. Two A-10s circle low through the mountains of Afghanistan. Below them, 90 Special Operations troops are surrounded by Taliban soldiers. It's time for the A-10 to go in for the kill.
So I came around for a second pass. I put about 300 rounds on the ridgeline just north of the rocket.
The A-10 makes another pass. It can't see through the clouds to tell if it's hit its target, but ground troops radio up the good news.
On the last pass, they were confirmed that, yeah, just hit your last impacts. That was effective.
Finally, 2 rescue helicopters are cleared to land.
It was a very successful mission. We got everybody out that day. There were 90 people on the ground.
Tenacity, toughness, reliability, hallmarks of the Air Force's go-to plane for close air support.
It really highlighted the capabilities of the A-10 in terms of being able to operate underneath the weather, being able to provide accurate pinpoint fires to support the guys on the ground.
Not bad for a weapon that some say the Air Force never wanted at all. 1965. The U.S. Air Force and the Army are at war. Not just in Vietnam, but with each other. It's a battle that's been brewing for years.
The Air Force had had a very close relationship with the Army during Korea, but as the 1950s and early 1960s progressed, the Army and the Air Force moved farther apart.
Rebecca Grant is an Air Force historian and defense analyst.
During World War II, close air support was one of the primary missions for the Air Forces. But in the 1950s, the nuclear mission took over, and close air support was neglected.
The Air Force believes that close air support is a thing of the past. Future wars will be won by air power alone.
The Air Force thought that the next war would be all about nuclear deterrence and nuclear strike, involving masses of bombers and also intercept fighters, but with very little role for ground forces.
To fight this new war, the Air Force puts all their money into fast bombers, designed to counter the nuclear threat.
The new fighters were designed either as interceptors or to deliver nuclear weapons. That meant that there really weren't any aircraft in the 1950s designed specifically for the close air support mission.
The Air Force doctrine looks good in theory, but the reality of Vietnam catches them off guard. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, ground troops are an essential part of the war. High-flying Air Force fighters struggle to provide support.
As more U.S. troops ended up in Vietnam, the Air Force realized that they'd really let their abilities in close air support slip.
As the casualties pile up, the Army feels that it's been left out to dry. So it comes up with a bold plan to make the close air support mission its own. June 1966. The U.S. Army reveals its plan for an attack helicopter. They call it the Cheyenne. It's a close air support platform designed to put Air Force bombers to shame.
With the Cheyenne program, this was the Army's initiative to do close air support their way, on their own.
The Cheyenne is fast. It's heavily armed, and it's very expensive. The Air Force looks on with alarm. If the Cheyenne program goes through, they could lose the close air support mission altogether and the budget that goes with it.
So the Air Force reacted to the Cheyenne program by starting a new program of its own.
September 1966, the Pentagon. General John P. McConnell starts a new Air Force initiative, the Attack Experimental Program.
McConnell was a 100% bomber guy. He had no interest in close support, but he sure didn't want to go down in history as the chief of staff who lost a major mission for the Air Force.
Pierre Sprey is a defense analyst and engineer. He wrote the initial requirements for the A-10.
The objective we were given was to develop a really effective combat machine at very low cost, lower cost than the Cheyenne, and more effective.
Vietnam isn't the only war that has the Pentagon worried. Soviet tanks line up along Europe's Cold War battlefield, waiting to strike. The new aircraft will have to do double duty, protect soldiers and destroy the Soviet threat.
For the U.S. Air Force, having the dedicated tank-killing, close air support, ground attack plane was absolutely essential.
Standard Air Force doctrine gets turned on its head. Forget high and fast. This new plane has to hold enough fuel to hang over the battlefield as long as troops need.
First and foremost, you got to be able to get in close enough to find the targets. So we demanded an airplane with a lot of loiter time. 2 hours or more was essential.
To hover low and slow, the new plane will have to be tough.
The second thing is you had to have an airplane that could really withstand hits from machine guns, small cannons, and even shoulder-fired missiles. You needed an airplane that could take those hits and get the pilot back.
Finally, you need firepower, lots of it.
You need firepower that's precise. This has to be firepower that will suppress the bad guys, get rid of them, and not hurt your guys. And it has to be able to punch through tanks or armored personnel carriers.
A request for proposals goes out in May 1970. This aircraft will be far different from anything the Air Force has ever produced.
Almost every aspect of how we put the A-10 together was like a radical innovation.
March 30th, 1976, Langley Air Force Base. The U.S. Air Force announces the winner, Fairchild Republic's A-10. It's the only Air Force aircraft designed solely for close air support. The A-10's body makes an instant impression.
The A-10 seemed to violate every precept of streamlined, high-speed design.
They immediately dubbed it the Warthog because it had warts and bumps all over it. It was ugly, ugly as sin.
Many in the Air Force are skeptical right from the get-go.
Generals almost uniformly hated it. They thought the A-10 weakens the real mission of the Air Force, which is bombing and multi-mission fighters.
The powers that be are skeptical, but the A-10 pilots love it right from the start.
The A-10 is a wonderful airplane to fly. It's easy to fly, it's stable. You feel like you could get in there, get the job done, get out, so those young Americans can come home safely at the end of the day.
Protecting troops is its mission, but the Warthog was designed to get pilots out of any situation too.
Its high-mounted straight wings give it excellent low-altitude maneuverability, excellent slow-speed maneuverability, and the ability to take off and land on relatively short airfields.
Its maneuverability makes the A-10 tough to hit. The position of its engines makes the A-10 tough to find.
Underneath the cockpit and just behind the cockpit underneath are protected by titanium armor, which protects against artillery rounds fired from the ground. It's designed to stop up to 23mm anti-aircraft fire, which is significant anti-aircraft fire.
Pilots like the design, and the A-10 does look good on paper. But how will such a strange-looking plane hold up in flight? June 3rd, 1977, Le Bourget Airfield in Paris. Fairchild Republic gets ready to roll out its fancy new plane on the world stage.
The Paris Air Show was started in 1909, and it's the world's premier showcase for new aircraft and the most sophisticated designs.
To show off its new baby, Fairchild Republic selects test pilot Sam Nelson. He's logged over 500 hours in the aircraft.
Sam Nelson got in the plane, taxied down the runway, took off uneventfully. His plan was to come back around, do a low-altitude loop, and wow the crowd.
But as Nelson comes out of his loop, it becomes clear that the A-10 is flying much too low. And then, the unthinkable happens. The Air Force hopes that its new close air support platform will wow the world. But the A-10's debut quickly turns into disaster.
The Paris International Air Show opened today with tragedy.
The A-10 sinks too low. It strikes the ground. Dirty black smoke and flames shoot out everywhere. It's a fatal crash.
Pilot Sam Nelson dies on the way to the hospital.
Sam Nelson was a very experienced pilot, a good test pilot, and knew the A-10 very well. But he got overconfident, he pushed the aircraft too far, and it resulted in a fatal accident.
The A-10 is starting to look like a failed experiment. But it's still the Cold War, and Soviet tanks are still a threat. The Army puts pressure on the Air Force to keep the plane flying.
They knew for the U.S. to be a superpower with a superpower army, it needed the A-10 for that dedicated close air support role.
For 12 long years, A-10 supporters wait to show how their plane can perform. Finally, the Warthog gets put to the test. August 1990. Saddam Hussein sends 500,000 Iraqi troops into neighboring Kuwait. The rest of the world is panicked. Most of the Earth's oil is now in Hussein's hands. In November, a 39-member coalition demands that Hussein remove his troops.
Mr. Saddam Hussein, you must simply do what the world is calling upon you to do. Get out.
But Hussein refuses. The clock begins to count down to war. Air Force General Charles Horner lays out the strategy for the upcoming war.
We've worked hard to bring together this very complex and very large campaign plan.
His list is heavy with stealth planes and bombers. A-10s are not in the plan.
General Horner didn't want the airplane there. Hated the airplane, did not want it there.
Lieutenant Colonel Tom Norris was an A-10 pilot during the First Gulf War.
The Air Force had no intention of deploying the airplane. General Horner believed that the F-15E and the F-16 could handle close air support.
But Allied Commander Norman Schwarzkopf has other ideas. Schwarzkopf is an Army general. The close air support mission is near and dear to his heart.
General Schwarzkopf mandated that the A-10 be brought over to the theater. He thought it was ludicrous that the United States Air Force thought that you could take an air interdiction designed aircraft and apply it towards a close air support role.
We have a campaign plan. We're going to follow that campaign plan until we accomplish the objectives set out by the United Nations resolutions and as announced by the President of the United States.
Schwarzkopf's endorsement is a huge boost for the unproven pilots.
We were thrilled that we were getting to go, and we were charged up because General Schwarzkopf wanted us, and he represented those men and women on the ground.
February 1991, the northwest corner of Iraq. Norris is on a night patrol with other A-10s. Suddenly, his radio begins to buzz.
It was an emergency CAS call, meaning that this was an Army team, and they were indicating that they were trapped. The enemy had encircled them, and they had no way to escape.
We have enemy QRF approaching 300 meters from the east.
You could tell from their voices that they were in trouble and they needed help.
Norris and his wingman put their A-10s into full throttle. Minutes later, they looked down at a chaotic scene.
When I looked out the huge bubble canopy on the A-10, I saw projectiles. What it looks like is little red-orange BBs, if you will, flying every which direction around this team. There doesn't seem to be any set pattern to it.
Pilots can see that their troops are in trouble, but in the dark, they can't tell friend from foe.
We had no sensors in the airplane to be able to utilize infrared energy to see different objects and use those things for targeting.
Training with ground troops has its advantages. The Warthogs know exactly what the soldiers can use to pinpoint their location.
The flight lead, he knew what they had with them. So when he said, do you have a strobe light? Do you have your strobe light with you? He knew it was kind of in their basic equipment list.
Warthog pilots are known for being resourceful. Even so, it's an ingenious plan.
He said, okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to dig a hole. I want you to turn that strobe light on and drop it in the hole. Once they did that, we could determine exactly where the friendlies were and that there was fire all around them. And that, therefore, was the enemy.
Ground troops give the go-ahead.
At that point, we began employing the 30-millimeter gun. And then we just laid waste to them. And because our reattack time is very quick, we were able to keep constant pressure on the enemy.
Its long loiter time means the A-10 can stick around to see the fight through. The final score, A-10s 60, Iraqi soldiers 0.
There was an all-safe call 45 minutes after we had shown up.
Close air support is just one of the A-10's triumphs. The Warthog proves to be a force in the air war, too. A-10s destroy more Scud launchers than any other aircraft.
Scuds were the ballistic weapon that could carry chemicals, etc., that could very easily be launched from Iraq to Israel. And the A-10s had great success at killing Scuds.
Taking out air defense systems proves to be easy, too.
That mission is supposed to be for air interdiction airplanes like the F-16 and F-15E. Well, unfortunately, the day before, F-16s had been tasked against it and missed. So A-10s the following day were tasked to go in, and they shacked it. That asset was completely destroyed.
Altogether, the A-10 flies over 8,000 missions. It destroys more than 900 Iraqi tanks. And it takes out over 300 armored personnel carriers and artillery sites.
We put the hurt on them pretty good.
The Warthog is the low-tech star of a high-tech war. Even General Horner is impressed.
Third day of the war, he wrote, I take back all the bad things I ever said about the A-10. They're saving our asses. General Horner.
But the A-10s have little time to savor their success. No sooner are they back in the States than they get some disappointing news.
We had been back just a few months. It was announced that the A-10s, the bulk of them, were all going in the boneyard. So it was a huge slap in the face given how well the airplane had performed.
To many Warthog pilots, it feels like the same old song.
They did not cut, percentage-wise, near the number of F-16s as they cut A-10s. Again, they did not want the airplane.
But if the A-10 has powerful opponents in the Air Force, it has friends in the Army. Thanks to its street fighter image, the A-10 manages to hang on. And in just a few years, it gets a chance to undertake the ultimate close air support mission, protecting a downed pilot. March 24th, 1999, Serbia. NATO announces a bombing campaign against President Slobodan Milosevic. The goal? To stop his vicious ethnic cleansing campaign of Albanian Muslims.
We all agree that we cannot allow President Milosevic to continue the aggression with impunity.
The coalition begins with a massive air war to destroy the Serbian infrastructure. The U.S. brings dozens of choppers and fighters to the fight. Just hours into the war, the A-10 squadrons get an urgent call. The Serbs have shot down one of America's most valuable assets, a stealth F-117.
According to the Yugoslav army, the stealth fighter was shot down by a surface-to-air missile.
the pilot has been forced to eject deep inside enemy territory.
The first thing the combat search and rescue crews care about is the person. We want to get him out.
Brigadier General John Cherry was an A-10 commander during the Balkan Wars.
The second thing we might have in the back of our mind is the strategic value of that person to the enemy. And we knew that if they could catch a 117 pilot, that it would be a huge strategic loss for the NATO coalition at the time.
Coalition air forces quickly assemble a search and rescue operation. Cherry and 5 other A-10s take the lead.
We took off about 9:45 in the evening, which is about an hour after the F-117 had been reported shot down.
The only trouble is, they aren't sure where they're heading.
We had 5 sets of coordinates as to where the survivor potentially could be. Those coordinates spanned over 76 miles.
76 miles isn't a lot of territory for the A-10s to cover, but it is dangerous. Serb radar are on high alert.
Within the survivors' small radius, there were numerous surface-to-air missiles, and we knew that the surface-to-air missiles were tracking us.
Cherry maneuvers his A-10 above the missiles, trying to lock on to the pilot's location.
The A-10 is unique in that it has an automatic direction finder in the UHF ranges of the radio. And so if a pilot is using a radio, the aircraft itself can detect that signal and give me bearing to the pilot.
As he circles, Cherry hears a voice come through his radio. It's the pilot. The A-10 hones in on his signal.
At that point, I'm focused completely on making sure that he is secure and that he's ready to be picked up.
But Cherry isn't the only one tracking the signal.
The Serbians were on the radios as well, and so the more the pilot talked on the radio, the more that the enemy would also be able to use that capability against him.
Finding the pilot won't count for much if the Serbs get to him first.
For the last 3 nights, we had been hitting targets all around those areas, and we knew that the people in those areas were not going to be nice to anyone that they found that was an American pilot.
As the A-10s circle overhead, they know that the pilot's fate is resting in their hands.
The only thing I could picture was him kneeling on the ground with a gun to his head. We were going to stay there until we got him out.
The A-10s have the pilot's location, but the Serbs are closing in on the ground. Now it's a race against time. Enemy forces in Serbia are closing in on a downed American airman. A-10 pilot John Cherry knows that if he can't get the pilot out soon, it may be too late.
One of the things that I have to do as the on-scene commander is figure out, is he ready to be picked up? I thought that we were good to go at that point and decided to bring the helicopters in.
With Serb missiles on high alert, A-10 pilots know that the helicopters will be sitting ducks. So the Warthogs decide to create a decoy.
While the helicopters were coming in low to pick up the survivor, my wingman and I tried to move away from the area.
The A-10s turn away from the downed pilot, and the Serbs take aim with the very same surface-to-air missiles that shot down the F-117.
Here is the most stealthy aircraft that was just shot down by something, and I was in the least stealthy aircraft in the Air Force inventory.
Cherry's decoy works. 2 choppers touch down for the rescue. And the A-10s finally get the word that they've been waiting for.
When we finally got word that he was on board and had egressed out of Serbian airspace, it was just such a tremendous relief. It was extremely rewarding in that we got him out.
By now, the A-10 isn't just a favorite of pilots. It's a favorite of the men and women who maintain it, too.
The A-10 is resilient to weather, it's resilient to the small arms fire. It's resilient in almost every way. That's one of the major pros to maintaining this aircraft.
It's a lot of bang for your buck. And just how much was getting ready to be proven again in Iraq. April 7th, 2003, Iraq. Fighting rages across Baghdad. American and Allied soldiers storm through the streets under heavy fire from President Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard.
That day, we got a call saying that troops were in contact and they needed immediate assistance.
Lieutenant Colonel Kim Campbell was an A-10 pilot in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Her call sign, Killer Chick.
They said they were taking fire and they needed immediate support from our aircraft overhead their location.
Moments later, the Warthogs find themselves looking down at an epic gun battle, with American troops on the losing side. The A-10s don't waste a minute. They dive down and get right to work.
We made several passes, both with our Gatling gun and high explosive rockets on the enemy location.
American troops scramble to safety, but the Iraqi fighters don't give up easily. As the A-10s head out, anti-artillery fire and RPGs streak by.
I had come down low to do the rocket pass and was climbing back up. And that's when I just felt and heard a very large impact at the back of the jet. I knew immediately I had been hit by enemy fire.
The impact dumps the Warthog's nose forward. Suddenly, Lieutenant Colonel Campbell finds herself looking straight down at a city of 11 million people, many of them hostile.
So I'm staring at Baghdad thinking that this is not the location that I want to eject in. And so I just focused on the task at hand of getting the aircraft under control.
Campbell has just seconds to size up her situation. She can see right away that it doesn't look good.
I had several caution lights, lots of things flashing, lots of noises. The airplane is not responding to my input. The biggest thing to me was the hydraulic gauges read 0, and I had completely lost hydraulics when the aircraft got hit.
Hydraulics provide the power to move an aircraft's flight controls and landing gear. For most aircraft, losing hydraulic power would mean sure disaster, but not for the sturdy A-10.
If you lose one hydraulic system, then our aircraft is built, so the other system will take over. If you lose both hydraulic systems, then we have this system called manual reversion.
The A-10 is the only Air Force fighter with the manual reversion option. To activate it, the pilot simply flips a switch. This deactivates the hydraulic system and allows the pilot to steer the plane using a series of cables and pulleys. She controls these through sheer muscle power. It's kind of like driving a 25,000-pound car without power steering at 400 miles an hour.
It's just a manual way of controlling the aircraft, kind of back to the early days of flying.
Campbell radios back to base to tell them she's coming in. Only 2 A-10 pilots have ever attempted a manual landing, and only one of them survived.
My gut feeling was that I was going to try to land the airplane. You know, the A-10 had served me well up to this point, and I wasn't ready to eject out of it.
The runway is lined with emergency personnel. Campbell is so focused on landing that she doesn't even notice. Once she's on the ground, Campbell can finally see how badly she's been hit.
I had hundreds of holes in the fuselage and tail section of the aircraft, and a giant football-sized hole in the horizontal stabilizer at the back of the aircraft. I really felt like if I had been flying any other aircraft that day, that maybe my situation wouldn't have turned out in the same way.
Lieutenant Colonel Campbell's mission should have cemented the A-10's reputation. But not a month after, the New York Times gets hold of a confidential memo plotting the Warthog's demise.
Some of the systems that we have today, you put in a high threat environment, and they'll start falling from the sky like rain.
Major General Dave DePatula proposed that the A-10 fleet be wiped out within the next few years.
It looks like the A-10 has its head on the chopping block yet again. And this time, the Air Force is determined to succeed. May 27, 2003. It seems like the A-10 has finally won the Air Force's respect, but the New York Times reveals that the service has secretly been planning for the Warthog's demise.
That was the first time I can remember that some Air Force general proposed killing 100% of the force.
The Pentagon denies that it has plans to mothball the Warthog. But for anyone who's been paying attention, the writing is already on the wall.
For all the A-10's great combat reputation, the Air Force knew that it was time to think about replacing the A-10. And the Air Force planned for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter to replace both the A-10 and the F-16.
The Lockheed Martin F-35. It flies high, it flies fast, and it's ultra stealthy.
The F-35 couldn't be more different in looks or design from the A-10. It brings a very sophisticated suite of sensors and weapons that will give the soldier on the ground a lot of choices about the kind of close air support they want.
At $1.5 trillion, it's the Department of Defense's costliest weapons program ever. But the benefits outweigh the costs.
The ability to gather and share intelligence, the ability to talk to control centers, to other aircraft, and to forces on the ground. In the F-35, these all go way beyond what we've seen in the A-10.
That's what they say, but the F-35 program has many critics. There are software delays, cost overruns, accidents.
The Pentagon today stopped test flights of the F-35 fighter jet. The F-35 has cost taxpayers about $400 billion already and is years behind schedule.
The F-35 was originally planned to enter the Air Force in 2015, but it still has years of testing before it proves its worth.
The airplane is going through test. I mean, we aren't going to know what it can and cannot do until 2021 or beyond.
February 2014, Washington, D.C. Air Force Chief of Staff General Mark Welsh unveils his 2015 budget. The amount for the A-10, $0. The Warthog has faced down many opponents in its 37 years, but none as tough as this.
This was an all-out assault. This was a big PR campaign to kill the A-10.
Our amendment would keep...
A-10 advocates don't go down easy. They plead with Congress to save their favored plane.
And that is to keep the A-10 flying.
The A-10 is loved by many people, especially the guys on the ground, and it's loved by the pilots that fly it.
A-10 advocates accuse the Air Force of neglecting the close air support mission.
Do not agree that a B-1 is the same or a remotely piloted aircraft is the same to the soldiers on the ground. They want to see the A-10.
2014, the Senate Armed Services Committee prepares for a historic vote. It's yet another near-death experience for the sturdy plane. The A-10 is funded through the rest of 2014, but even its supporters agree that its days are numbered.
It's very understandable that people love the A-10, but it is time to move on and look for an information age platform, the F-35, that can do that close air support mission even better.
The A-10 Warthog. It's not sleek, it's not super fast, and it's not going to wow the crowds with high-flying barrel rolls. The A-10 is more of the strong, silent type. It just shows up, puts up, and goes home.
It's a tough airplane. It's going to take a lot to take it out of the sky.
Its revolutionary design reflects the need to unite the air war with troops on the ground.
We'll remember the A-10 as a plane that was designed with the person in mind. That plane was designed for the pilot and for the soldier on the ground, and to bring the two of them together.
Tough, deadly, ugly, deceptively maneuverable. It can take more punishment than any other plane in the Air Force's arsenal. When you need to get down and dirty, just call the A-10.